What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week on YouTube, including the new My Soccer series that officially launched the first episode yesterday. That would be Tuesday, so be sure to check out that as well. So much to get to today. Breaking it down into two segments as normal. Lionel Messi suspended, Concacaf Champions League semifinal to talk about, everything happening at Leeds, midweek action. I'm going to cover all of it, beginning with what happened in LA on Tuesday night. LAFC once again get past the Philadelphia Union to return to the Concacaf Champions League final. Got the goal they needed in Philly. Comprehensive win in the end in the second leg in LA. I want to start with the Union side of this, though. And I'm going to save the LAFC stuff for the end. If you're Jim Curtin, if you're Ernst Tanner, what is so infuriating about this is that they are not getting outplayed by LAFC. If you go look generally over the series, but specifically these last three meetings, they had MLS Cup 1. Were they great in that game? No. But did they keep LAFC in check and go toe-to-toe with them? Absolutely. And then they made the play to get the goal to go up a man, and then Gareth Bale happened. Maybe they weren't the better team, but it was dead even. And then you look at these two legs. Philly was excellent in leg one. LAFC offered very little going forward, and the Union played right through them. They should have won at least 2-0, based on the chances they had. Instead, they draw 1-1 because they don't take most of their chances, and Kellen Acosta, just like he did in MLS Cup, scores a bizarre, massive goal to change the complexion of the game. He had that deflected free kick in MLS Cup. This was the strange goal where he just kind of kicks the ball into the ground and it pops up in the right way and gets past Andre Blake. And then all of a sudden you go from having, a lead, not conceding an away goal in a tournament where that still matters, to you have to score and you have to get at least a 2-2 draw if you're going to avoid extra time going into LA. It just changed the complexion of that second leg. Didn't decide anything, but made the Union's life obviously a lot more difficult. That was completely in their control. They thoroughly outplayed LAFC in that first leg and ended up with a 1-1 draw that just wasn't good enough. And then you get to leg two. They didn't do all that much, and they give up. LAFC deserved that goal one way or another because that was a phenomenal save by Andre Blake to keep the first effort out. I believe it was Ilya who had the header, and then they get the rebound, put it in. That was the best chance of the game. LAFC took advantage. But outside of that, you were keeping yourself in the game. Union created a couple decent chances. Were they the better team? No. But again, they were hanging in there just fine in that really intimidating environment. Until Olivier Mbaizo decides to end the game in the 60th minute. And this might be my biggest pet peeve in all of sports, is a lack of emotional intelligence and emotional awareness. The first yellow he gets is just for shoving somebody because he wanted to. At the end of a play where the Union drew a yellow card and got a foul. And now you've got your right back on Dennis Bouanga's side of the field playing with a yellow. And he doesn't even last 15 minutes into the second half, and he picks up the second one. On, again, an incredibly unintelligent challenge that you simply cannot make on a yellow card. He didn't need to do it anyway, and it was a second yellow. There's nothing more to say about it. And at that point, you're down a goal. You need 1 to get to extra time, 2 to actually advance, and it's just not happening. And then LAFC kind of pour the goals on late. But that wasn't a 3-goal deficit in that game. LAFC, yes, they had the better chances. The numbers were in their favor. But until that red card, Union were doing fine. Maybe they get the goal to make it interesting. Maybe they don't. It's entirely possible that game ends 1-0, 2-0 anyway. But to have those 3 games and to not win any of them because of things you can control, at no point in these 3 games, and just generally in the series between these 2 teams, and this is one of the things I brought up before MLS Cup, at no point did it ever feel like the Union were outmatched. And yet they just let these opportunities slip away. And your margin of error is so slim against LAFC that when you actually make them look vulnerable and make them look normal, like the Union did in that first leg, you have to take advantage. You just have to. And they didn't. But from a Union's perspective, I just don't look at this and say, well, they're not good enough. They can't do it. LAFC is just too much firepower. Because they're matching up just fine with them. They're just not executing. And those Kellen Acosta goals just kind of came out of nowhere. And they weren't able to respond. But you removed yourself from having the opportunity because Olivier Mbaizo excused himself from the game. And like I said, that might be my biggest pet peeve, is just not being aware of the situation and being able to keep your emotions under control. The second part of this on the Union side is Jim Curtin. He's getting a lot of criticism for not using that bench. And yes, he needs to use that bench more. This goes back to the COVID game against NYCFC in the Eastern Conference Final 2 seasons ago, the one that they lost. That game was headed in one direction, and NYCFC were going to get that goal that ultimately sent them to MLS Cup before it went to a penalty shootout. You could feel it coming, and Jim Curtin didn't do anything about it. That was the first time I really noticed this, and it's come up multiple times since then, specifically in this game. And yes, it's difficult because you're down to 10, and they don't have the depth LAFC have. And you lost your one kind of big-time weapon off the bench in Corey Burke this offseason. But it is fair to get on Jim Curtin for that. You got to use your bench more. Especially when you have a right back and a right-sided midfielder. Ali Bedoya could have gotten a red. I do think yellow was the right call, but it was close. You got both those guys on yellow cards in the first half. And it didn't feel like Mbaizo was really in control there. There's an argument he should have just been subbed at halftime because you couldn't trust him. And so the Union brought multiple players in this offseason to have the depth to be able to kind of navigate all this better. And then didn't use those players. Now, Damian Lowe was really good in this tournament until it got to the business end and the other 2 starting center backs took his spot. But you also had, a couple other pieces that could have factored into this game and factored into the series more that really just didn't get the opportunity. And Jim Curtin has to answer for that. Now, the other part of this is same thing I've been talking about with Graham Potter. I can only get on Jim Curtin so much because what is he supposed to do when his players don't convert the one-on-ones against the goalkeeper they had in the first leg? And when his right back makes those kind of decisions and his captain almost gets himself sent off in the first, 3 minutes of the game. And then gets the yellow card so he has to play differently for the other 87. This is on the players too. Your job as a manager is to put your team in position to succeed. In the first leg, Jim Curtin 100% did that. Second leg, okay, that's a little more debatable. I'm just not willing to make this a massive, and really what it comes down to is I'm not willing to make this a massive commentary on the Union yet. Maybe last season was the peak. Maybe it was. But to me, they were the best team in the league last season. I will not back down from that. They went toe-to-toe with LAFC in that stadium. They had the better goal difference. They were even on points. they had that game won. Now this season, they have not been anywhere near as good as LAFC, and they didn't do what they needed to in that first leg, and they got outplayed in the second one, in large part because of their own doing, because they were down a man for the last 30 minutes of the game. I'm going to give this time. I'm not going to freak out about it. I'm not going to say that this is kind of over, that they don't have the pieces. Need to see how the rest of the season goes. On the LAFC side, the big thing I want to hammer home here is that Steve Cherundolo and this team and this technical staff, going all the way up to John Thornton, do not get enough credit for the tactical transformation that has gone on within this club. I firmly believe if this is still Bob Bradley's LAFC, they lose MLS Cup final, if they even get there, and maybe they find a way to get out of this tie. Maybe. But I don't think they get the goal in Philly, and that changes the conversation. Why? Because they have found a way to not be so reliant on essentially being a Manchester City, right? Where you need to control every aspect of the game, possession, expansive, intricate, and if one thing kind of goes off the rails, you're in trouble. That was their problem in the postseason. I talked about this all the time during their run to MLS Cup. Do they have a plan B? Can they adjust when plan A goes wrong? And what they're showing you is 100% they can. MLS Cup, leg 1, leg 2 of the Concacaf Champions League. They gave the Union the ball. Said, here, try and beat us. Bob Bradley's team would have never done that in a million years. And it worked. Because the Union didn't take their chances. LAFC did. Because they're so dynamic on the counter now. And yes, if they need to, they can go pick you apart and they can, kind of systematically rip through your defense. If they need to. But they can also go, we have an away goal. We scored the first goal of the game because we're dominant on set pieces. We don't have to go get the second one. We can sit here, absorb some pressure, and try and hit them on the counter. And then eventually that led to goal 2 and 3. They are so much more versatile and so much better equipped to win trophies. Because whether it's MLS Cup, whether it's US Open Cup, whether it's Concacaf Champions League, you have got to be able to adapt to the situation. You have to be able to win multiple ways because weird things happen and you only get that one or those 2 games, right? This isn't about being the best team over 34. This is about being the best team on that day or those 2 days. And it's the same conversation we're having about Manchester City in the Champions League. When you can be this good on the counter, when you can sit back without the ball and be so good with the ball, it allows you to play differently based on the situation. If you give up a goal, it's not the end of the world because you've got a team that can go apply pressure for 15, 30 minutes at a time and just pour it on. And you also know that you don't have to play that way when you're up 2-1 on aggregate with an away goal. You can just sit there and defend and use Dennis Bouanga's pace and his terrific finishing ability. And this is why they are in a position to do something that no MLS team has ever done. Not just because they're great, and from a talent perspective, obviously they're right up there with any team this league has ever seen. But because they're actually built to win the trophies that are going to get them to this kind of place that has never been reached by a team from this league. And they're not there yet. Because you still got to win the trophies. One MLS Cup in a season where there's a real argument you weren't the best team in the league, as good as they were, is not enough. Getting to a Concacaf Champions League final. After that, you're getting closer, still not enough. But what they have the opportunity to do because of how good they are, because of their depth, because of their brilliance, is that they can separate themselves from just about everybody else by successfully juggling these competitions this season. And John Thornton has talked about this. They're in the business of winning all of them. And they should be. And they have the team to do it. The question is, can they actually execute? So far, so good, right? They are on pace. Maybe they don't win the Supporters' Shield because they're juggling a little bit, although they're still in a really good spot to do that. But you're going to feel really good about their chances in MLS Cup, barring some kind of disaster. They are in the final of the Concacaf Champions League. And, of course, they're going to be among the favorites for the Open Cup. And not that they have to win all three of them. But what has really been a challenge for the best MLS teams, and the Union are going through it this season, is what happens when you have to increase your workload and your schedule. Those extra games are brutal. Ask the Seattle Sounders, right? I will continue to believe that's the best Sounders team we've seen. It's the one that won the Concacaf Champions League. First MLS team to ever do it. They were the best team on the continent. And then what happened? They didn't make the playoffs. In large part because they were so focused on the Concacaf Champions League at the beginning of last season. And they could just never get it going. LAFC haven't had that problem. And now they're almost done with the Concacaf Champions League. That is how they're going to separate themselves and just take what a club can be in this league to a whole nother level. Time will tell if they can do it. But that is the opportunity they have because of everything that they've done so well. Their execution on the field, their tactical flexibility. And you will never be able to convince me that we'd be talking this way about LAFC if Bob Bradley was still manager. And I like Bob Bradley. I know that it's not going well in Toronto right now. But his style of play, his philosophy, is not built for trophies. It is built to win in the regular season, to be excellent game after game after game. And you can make an argument, Pep Guardiola is the same way. Although he does have plenty of non-regular season trophies to back it up. I get that. But this LAFC team has every tool, everything necessary to be the best team in the continent and beat whoever stands in their way, be it the Union, Tigres, some other Liga MX team, to play with the best and to not let that impact kind of their day-to-day operations in MLS. That is something we haven't seen before. And that's the position this team is now in. The other topic I'm going to cover in this first segment here is what has happened at Leeds United. Javi Gracia out, Victor Orta out. That's your manager, your director of football, who basically built this Leeds team, oversaw the Marcelo Bielsa era, all of that. And I want to start by going back to what I said when Jesse Marsch got fired. Jesse Marsch did not underachieve. Jesse Marsch didn't overachieve either. But he did not underachieve. He had that team exactly where that team was supposed to be. They're the 15th best team in the league with Tyler Adams healthy, and they're one of the worst three without him. And that is exactly what has happened. And I do feel bad for Javi Gracia because it's not really his fault. And he comes in, and it starts well, and then Tyler Adams gets hurt, and it's fallen apart. Now, they had to make this change because they look lost. They look completely out of confidence. And you have one opportunity with these, 4 games to save your season and kind of save this club from going back after things were going so well. To me, it's not on Gracia. It's just, it wasn't working. You got to try. But there's a reason I had Kelvin Phillips on my all-important Premier League team last season. And Tyler Adams might get there this season. This team defensively is just not good enough. And they've had two sensational holding midfielders that cover up so many of their flaws. And they pay the price when those guys aren't there. And so now you're in this really tough spot. You bring in Sam Allardyce, who I buy the logic here in terms of we got to stop leaking goals, get organized, and just see if we can pull something off here. And Allardyce has obviously made a living off of doing this, although you can have an argument as to how successful he's actually been. This is the reputation he's built. He's the relegation savior. At the same time, it needs to be pointed out that this is the most generic thing a club in this situation can do, and a strong commentary on Victor Orta. Because Sam Allardyce is the total opposite of Marcelo Bielsa, right? Leeds had this identity, this clear vision of who they wanted to be. And it has gone so poorly, and they have recruited so poorly, that they have basically given up on that identity. Because you fire Bielsa, and you think maybe just time had run out there, right? He is by no means a long-term planner guy. It's incredible he stayed at Leeds as long as he did. So then you go bring in somebody with the same general philosophy in Jesse Marsch. So it's not like anything changed there. And now you have gone from that to Sam Allardyce. There is, right, any club in this position, Sam Allardyce is the person you're going to call. There is nothing distinctive about Leeds at this point, and that is a massive problem, and that is a personnel problem in terms of player acquisition, identity, managerial search, who you want leading your club, and what the vision is, all of that kind of stuff, and that's Victor Orta. Because now you're just back to square one. You're hoping that you can find a way to save this and try again next year. But the problems are still going to be there. And now you have a game at Manchester City, which, by the way, I also want to acknowledge Erling Haaland, 35 goals, Premier League, single season record. I will never understand why anybody doubted his ability to have success. It's laughable how much success he has had this season and just what he's done. So congratulations to him. You have a new Premier League single season goal scorer. He could very well break it at some point in his City career again. But wanted to also acknowledge that while I talk about Manchester City briefly there. So at Manchester City, home against Newcastle, playing really, really well. Still fighting for top 4. At West Ham, still in the thick of the relegation fight. And then at Spurs, who knows what you're going to get. They could still be in position to try and qualify for Europe at that point. They might be inspired even if they're kind of out of that conversation. Who knows? But there's a real chance you don't get any points from those games. Or you get, 1 or 2. And that's not going to be enough. And then you look at what Leicester and Everton did on Monday. Jamie Vardy scoring goals again for Leicester. They've got their midfield back. They're playing better. They've still, defensively, there are problems. But they're playing better. And Everton, that was an inspired performance. They only came away with a point. They probably needed 3. But you can't fault the effort or the ambition. They came out, they played, they created all kinds of chances, and they just couldn't capitalize the way they needed to. It was this very bizarre game. Leicester could have been up 3-4-1. Everton could have been up 3-4-1. And it ended 2-2. But you need to pass one of those teams, even if you assume Nottingham Forest and Southampton are going down. And they are just, from a schedule standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, from a form standpoint, Leicester and Everton are just in better situations than Leeds right now. This is a massive, massive hole that Leeds have to climb out of. And I know they're right there in terms of points. But where are they? You have to do something to change the status quo. And where are those points coming from in these 4 games? Manchester City still haven't clinched the title. I haven't really done the math on how close Newcastle are to top 4, but I don't think they will have clinched it in 2 games from now. And they're still going to want to take a victory lap anyway. West Ham, probably not going to feel 100% safe. And then again, Spurs, who knows what you're going to get. But there just aren't, you don't look at that and see points. And it's not like they need 1 or 2. They need to make sure that they end up with more than Everton and Leicester. It's a monumental task. It really is. And I said this even before, I think it was last week on this show. I said, I am really, really concerned for Leeds. They're just in one of the 3 worst positions, and they're one of the 3 worst teams. And now they're going to the relegation expert to see if he can pull off a miracle here, but quite honestly, I don't see it happening. There's just too little time, too much difficulty in the schedule, and too much work to do. Maybe I'm wrong, but the final thing I'll say here, and I made this point in my 5 things from the week, don't ever doubt Tyler Adams' value and importance, club and country, again after this. Go look. Their performances since he has been injured are staggering. He is the most important player on this team. He is the most important player on the U.S. men's national team. And it's not close. I'm a firm believer you learn as much about a player's value when they're not there as you do when they are. And that's proving to be the case with Tyler Adams right now and the situation Leeds United now find themselves in. I'm going to take my first break. When I come back, it's time to talk Messi, suspended by PSG. What does this mean for his future? All of that will be coming up right after the break. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. As I mentioned at the top of every segment, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything I put out every single week on YouTube. The other big news so far this week, Lionel Messi suspended 2 weeks by PSG for missing training due to a trip to fulfill his Saudi Arabia tourism promotional responsibilities. Listening to Fabrizio Romano talk about this, there are some details that are important I want to get out first. Number 1, reportedly Messi rescheduled this trip twice to accommodate PSG's schedule. And Messi's side of the story is that he had gotten this figured out. He picked this time for a reason because there was supposed to be a break, and that he was on his way to Saudi Arabia by the time this training that got scheduled for Monday was added to the schedule. There was nothing, according to Messi, based on what Romano is reporting, there was nothing he could have done about this by the time that training session got added. Now that's Messi's side. Just wanted to throw that out there, though. Because it wasn't like this was intentional from everything I have seen and what's being reported. That's important to clarify. And that doesn't mean he should get away with it. I am fine with him being suspended and PSG taking a stand and saying we can't have our players missing training for what is essentially, brand enhancement and commercial obligations. What cannot happen, though, is that Messi is somehow kind of made a scapegoat for everything that's gone on at PSG. Because by doing this to Messi, again, I'm fine with suspending him. But by taking this hard stance against Messi, PSG is taking the easy way out of basically accountability and trying to fix the issues they have. They're picking on the easy target. Messi was probably going to leave even before this happened, and he certainly is now. You don't really need him. I mean, you've got enough of a cushion. You've got Mbappe. And Messi's always kind of been the second guy there. You're not doing this to Mbappe, but you can get away with him with Messi because, you know, the fans haven't exactly bought in. It's just the kind of the cheap option. And again, it doesn't mean it's the wrong one, but they picked the guy to make an example of that. Basically there are no consequences to this from a PSG standpoint, unless they somehow throw away Ligue 1. There are consequences if it's one of the other two guys. And you pick the guy who has never had his professionalism questioned by anybody ever in his long and remarkable career. A sentence that will never be said about Neymar or Mbappe. Remember the conversation surrounding Mbappe before that World Cup. And then he was remarkable again. He nearly single-handedly won France a second straight Men's World Cup, and now all of a sudden he's kind of back to being the best player in the world. But it's not like this has been a smooth year for him. All that Real Madrid stuff, basically just taking control of the club. And yet, Messi's the first guy to get punished for anything. That's what I mean by taking the easy way out and just picking on the easy target. Because Messi just doesn't care enough to be upset about this because he's done it a month anyway. And it wasn't just this. It sure sounds like he wasn't going to. I mean, if he would have resigned, he probably would have done it by now. The longer this went, the more it sounded, just very basically, on the most basic level, right? The longer he goes without signing a new contract, the more that implies he's not signing a new contract at PSG. So you burn the final bridge, but the bridge was probably already burned anyway. So it doesn't really matter. But you're trying to kind of be the enforcer here and set new standards for PSG moving forward. It's not that I have an issue with it in a vacuum. It just needs to be pointed out that it's cheap. Because there could have been more accountability for Neymar and Mbappe, and there never was. And that's part of the reason PSG have ended up in the position that they are. Messi has never been the problem. He is the opposite. He wants as little attention as possible. And yet somehow he's the guy that ends up suspended here. But it's not like you can just let your star player miss training without consequences. I get that part of it. So then the question becomes, okay, where is Messi going? And I'm only going to spend so much time on this, but I do want to point out a couple things here. One, this is obvious, but it still needs to be said. This is not the same situation Cristiano Ronaldo was in. This is a Messi who was arguably the best player at a World Cup 4 or 5 months ago. 5-6 months ago. He's obviously a few years younger. He's having a good season at PSG. Ronaldo basically got to a point where there was no home for him in Europe. Bayern were not taking him. Napoli had no reason to take him. Those were two of the clubs that got linked, and none of it ever made sense. There was the reports that Sporting Kansas City were prepared to put together an offer and tried to sell him, and I just can't see Ronaldo living in Kansas City. There just weren't that many places for him to go. That's not the case with Messi here. However, it's also just this bizarre situation because Barcelona makes plenty of sense, except for they're going to have a really tough time convincing La Liga that they have the money to do this. So you can't just kind of make that easy connection. Maybe it happens, but they've been talking about this since the day he left, and it hasn't even really come close. And again, remember, he left in large part because they didn't have the money to pay him. So then, Inter Miami. That seems to have been the front runner for most of this time. It makes a lot of sense. They've also struggled this season after getting off to a good start the first couple weeks. They don't seem particularly close to competing for anything. Does that matter? Maybe not. Certainly Miami is much more logical landing spot than Kansas City. And then the other option is Saudi Arabia. And so this is going to be a real test of how much influence that Saudi Arabian money has. Because, yes, you can... It is 100% fair to criticize Ronaldo for kind of empowering and supporting the sports washing and everything that comes with lending his name to the Saudi Arabian League. 100% fair. Part of the story needs to be acknowledged. There's the other part of that where I just also go, where else was he supposed to go? It's not like he turned down 500 clubs specifically to go to Saudi Arabia. And sure, the money helps. If Messi at this point in his career, when he clearly has something left in the tank and is a high level player still, a world-class player, even if he's not the best player in the world anymore, also chooses to take Saudi Arabia's money and not continue in Europe, not go to Major League Soccer, that is a major statement about where the sport is going, the influence of that Saudi Arabian league and the money that comes with it, and all of the implications that go along with that. So we're going to have to wait and see. It is, Ronaldo obviously had multiple, clubs in Europe he played for. His story was a little more complex, which is the other part of this that needs to be acknowledged, is you could see Ronaldo playing for Bayern or PSG or whomever, just as a general concept, right? He played for United, he played for Real Madrid, he played for Juventus. He played in multiple leagues. He played at the highest level for multiple clubs. Messi stayed at Barcelona until Messi couldn't stay at Barcelona anymore, and then he went to PSG. It's much more difficult to see Messi even going to Manchester City at this point, and not that Manchester City would want him necessarily, but or Bayern or whoever. There is a difference there where it feels like if it's not Barcelona and it's not PSG, it's not in Europe. Maybe something surprising happens with that. But that does complicate things a little bit, that there is no obvious pathway to, here's a European team that could use him that makes sense for him to go to. Unless Barcelona can get the money figured out. And I'll believe it when I see it. But we're going to find out about how much power this Saudi Arabia money has. Because if Messi takes it too, at this point in his career, when he's already getting the tourism money, right? Ronaldo doesn't need the money either. But Messi is already getting compensated incredibly well from Saudi Arabia. That is a major statement of intent and a warning sign that this is just the beginning. And there will always be players just like the Live Golf Tour who take the money. But to have Messi, of all people, do it now would be incredibly concerning. So we're going to have to see how this plays out. He's going to have a couple games, theoretically, when he gets back from the suspension with PSG, and then we'll see where things go from there. But I'll circle back to kind of my bigger point here. You see, the fans going after him. I saw something about fans showing up at Neymar's house. This is not on Messi. It's just not. Did he make a mistake? Sure, if you want to call it that. There was some kind of miscommunication that needs to be addressed and he needs to be held accountable for. But don't go start acting like this is on this. What's happened to PSG this season is Messi's fault. There are way bigger issues that have nothing to do with him that were here, that were at the club long before he got there. And I will point out one more time, nobody has ever questioned his professionalism once. There seems to just be something weird that happened. The bridge is burned. He's moving on. It's probably in PSG's best interest. It's definitely in his. Weird way to end it, but we'll have to wait and see where Messi goes next. The other thing I want to mention real quickly before I take my second break, obviously we had some Premier League action. Erling Haaland breaks the Premier League goal scoring record as City win again. Liverpool get a win over Fulham. You had your DFB Pokal semifinals. But the thing that's really caught my eye this week so far is what's happening in Serie A. So that's what I want to talk about for a minute. Napoli, another opportunity to clinch goes by because Lazio win. Napoli still have their game this week. So in the 24 hours, even less than that after this show ends, Napoli could be Serie A champions. But Lazio do their part to keep the title race alive, getting a win. AC Milan and Roma drew each other over the weekend. Really exciting ending. They both then draw midweek. Meanwhile, Inter destroy Hellas Verona. They beat Lazio over the weekend, which opened the door for Napoli to basically just need one result to go their way to clinch the title. So they've shot back up. Inter have shot back up into fourth. They're scoring boatloads of goals now. And all 7 of your primary, your quote-unquote big clubs plus Atalanta, if you don't want to include Atalanta as the big clubs, are within 2 points of a Champions League spot. That 4th spot currently held by Inter. You've got AC Milan, Roma, and Atalanta right behind them. And Lazio are not safe, and Juventus are not safe. Those are your 2nd and 3rd place teams. So Napoli are going to win this title. It's a question of when. But then you have a fascinating race for those final spots. Premier League, you've pretty much got your top 4 at this point. France, you've pretty much got your top 3 or 3 Champions League teams. The question is which one gets that second automatic qualification to the group stage. Germany, still got 5 teams pretty much fighting for those spots. Leipzig, Freiburg, Union Berlin, and then, of course, Dortmund and Bayern. So that's got some intrigue there. And Spain, you've got your top 3 set. So there isn't all that much excitement in terms of Champions League spots. But Serie A is delivering in that regard. Atalanta just kind of hung around. They've been, 6th or 7th most of the season. But all of a sudden, they've started to pick it up a little bit. AC Milan, Roma dropped more points. And Inter, after not being able to beat any Italian clubs for a while there, have all of a sudden kicked it into gear. And the other beautiful thing I'll get to in my weekend look ahead here is that all these clubs just keep playing each other. And so every game and every week just changes so much. And now Atalanta have caught up to the teams in front of them. So now a good month here to end the season. Maybe they don't get into Champions League, but they could knock somebody out of, European competition, knock somebody down to the Conference League. This is incredible drama. So, Premier League's got the relegation battle, which is exciting, not as exciting as it was a few weeks ago, but this is where your drama is in Serie A. Just every week, it seems like the entire complexion is changing. Lazio had themselves some breathing room, and then they stumble a little bit. They regrouped and got their win today, which is all that prevented them from kind of being with everybody else. But even if they don't finish the season strong, they could find themselves outside of the Champions League, outside of the top four. So, absolutely incredible what's going on in Serie A. Be sure to follow that in these final few weeks of the season. Going to take one more break, and then when I come back, as always, the weekend look ahead, taking a look at what is coming up on the soccer schedule. Taking one more break, so I'll be right back. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back one final time to the Touchline Talk Show on this Wednesday evening. It is time, as always, for the weekend look ahead, starting in England. There are a bunch of games on Monday as well, so this is not your entire slate. I keep it just to the weekend. So these are basically every game that's happening because they all have implications somewhere. Leeds at Manchester City. Can Leeds pull off a miracle? Can Manchester City keep their push toward the title going? Crystal Palace at Spurs on Saturday. How do Spurs respond? Right, still in the thick of that Europa League race. Aston Villa at Wolves on Saturday. Again, Aston Villa right there, thick of the Europa League race. Brentford at, I can't read my writing. I believe that is Liverpool. My apologies. So, again, Brentford hanging around. Liverpool obviously starting to play much better. Kind of got some things going. To me, they're going to finish 5th. Can they keep that up? Take another step toward that happening. Then Sunday, 2 games. Arsenal at Newcastle. Arsenal need help, obviously, to get back into the title race. But still want to finish the season strong. Newcastle trying to wrap up that top 4 spot. And then Manchester United at West Ham on Sunday. United, again, trying to make sure they get that Champions League spot. West Ham, difficult. I got both Manchester clubs right here, back to back, trying to just make sure they don't get dragged too far into this relegation race because they are right there. They've still got some breathing room. But if they keep letting points go left and right here, they are not safe yet. In Spain, just one game to talk about. Real Madrid at Osasuna. Copa del Rey final on Saturday. Real Madrid lost again. Atletico Madrid are now in second place in La Liga. I'm going to keep bringing this up because I get so tired of people just dismissing Real Madrid's struggles in the league because they're so good in the Champions League. But this is a chance for a trophy heading into that titanic clash with Manchester City in the Champions League semis. This is a game they should win. It's kind of the weird combination of game they should win, which is where they've struggled this season, and trophy on the line, which is where they obviously have delivered time after time in the Champions League. So we'll see which way this one goes. In Italy, again, all about those top 7 teams for the most part. Lazio at AC Milan on Saturday. Like I said, these teams keep playing each other. Inter at Roma on Saturday. Another massive game that's going to change the way the table looks. And then one more, Juventus at Atalanta. So you got 6 of those 7 teams playing each other this weekend. Fiorentina at Napoli on Sunday. If Napoli haven't clinched By then, they will get another opportunity to do so at home, or they get to take their victory lap at home, having already clinched the title. Spezia Calcio at Cremonese. That's one of your... And on Saturday, Hellas Verona at Lecce on Sunday. Those are your 2 games in the relegation battle in Italy. Germany, Leipzig at Freiburg on Saturday. Leipzig just wiped the floor with Freiburg in the DFB Pokal semis. Now they go play them again. A game with massive top 4 implications. That's your 5th and 4th place teams going at it. Can Leipzig kind of do the double here and jump back into a Champions League spot? Union Berlin at Augsburg on Saturday. Union Berlin, that other team right there trying to clinch a Champions League spot. Then you got your 2 title contenders, Bayern at Werder Bremen on Saturday. Wolfsburg at Borussia Dortmund on Sunday. This is one of the better teams Dortmund have left on their schedule. They've got all these home games. Can they make sure they get their points at home, survive one more road game, and at least make Bayern win out until the end? In France, another massive game in terms of Champions League implications. Marseille at Lens on Saturday. Again, these are your 2nd, 3rd place teams trying to get to that 2nd place because that's your only other group stage automatic qualifier. It looks like these are going to be your 2 of your 3 Champions League teams along with PSG. The question is who gets that automatic spot in the group stage. And then PSG at Troyes on Sunday. This thing is not over. PSG have not clinched this title. Can they keep things on track without Messi and prevent this from getting interesting? Then, domestically, MLS, DC United at FC Cincinnati on Saturday. Really interested by this one. DC off to a good start. Christian Benteke scored a terrific goal last weekend. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. FC Cincinnati, obviously one of the best teams in the league. Atlanta at Inter Miami in the Josef Martinez derby on Saturday. What role does he play? Inter finally got a big win last weekend to stop their losing streak. Josef Martinez did not start in that game. What role does he play here? St. Louis at Dallas on Saturday. It's 2 of your best teams in the Western Conference so far. And then Sunday, Sporting Kansas City at Seattle. I want to talk about Sporting Kansas City for 1 second. They've got a brutal stretch here. I believe it also involves LAFC and maybe St. Louis, I think. And maybe Dallas might be the 4th team. I don't remember. I'm pretty confident in LAFC, and I'm pretty confident in St. Louis coming up here. And I think 3 of the 4 are on the road, starting with this game in Seattle. There was that video of Johnny Russell basically saying, I got no explanation for what's happening. I was really, really high on this team, and boy, does it look like I was wrong. And I wrote about this last week in my 5 things from the week. It was going to take time for these guys to all get healthy and for them to figure out how this is going to work, because they're basically merging 2 teams together. The one they were supposed to have last season, the one they ended up having last season. Except, I know Gotti Kinda came off the bench, but they were playing at home against Montreal. Polito was out there. Johnny Russell was out there. Daniel Salary was out there. Gotti Kinda came off the bench. I know Willie Agata's hurt, but, and Eric Tommy was out there too. Most of their core guys were on the field, and they still lost to Montreal at home. A Montreal team that hadn't scored a goal on the road, if I remember correctly. They have to start picking up points or this is over. And that is similar to Leeds. It's not the schedule you want to have to be in that position. Then the NWSL 3 games I wanted to highlight. San Diego Wave at Washington Spirit on Saturday. Houston Dash at OL Reign on Saturday. And my most interesting game of the week, Kansas City Current at Angel City on Sunday. Kansas City finally starting to get some players back, starting to pick up some points. And Angel City obviously had that terrific game against the Portland Thorns last weekend. Where do they go from there? Continuing to watch how Julie Ertz fits in and watching Alyssa Thompson put on a show. That is all for this edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.